right, thank you very much. This is going to be a fun session, I think, at least. Just kind of talking about the history, some of the trends, obviously, and I'm super excited to hear what you guys have experienced throughout the years. And so we're going to go real quick and just, I want them to understand who you guys are. Nick, you want to get started?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm Nick Alex, Chief Hacking Officer at ASEC. I'm also the co-author of Black Hat Bash and Black Hat GraphQL.
How long have you been an adversary of sorts?
I've been hacking for 15 years.
Yeah, great. And then Jeff, you're on the other side of the fence, but give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, so I've been in IT about 27, 28 years, doing different security roles most of that time. Currently a CISO at New American Funding, and I lead IT and security. So I get to play with all the nice toys, actually find the vendors, and make my team get them operational.
Yeah,
to protect from these guys best we can.
And then Corey, are you working now?
Hello.
There we go.
Corey Ball, Senior Manager of Penetration Testing over at Moss Adams, and the founder of the API Security University, a completely free educational platform for all things API security related, and the author of Hacking APIs.
That's awesome. How long have you been playing the adversary role?
15 years.
15 years, okay. Yeah, you just talk loud, maybe that'll work out. So, and then I'm Brett. I've been with this company for 10 years, but most of my career prior to that was actually mostly on the other side of the fence, playing CTO roles, CISO roles for companies like BMC Software, Staples, Corporate Express, and others. So good collection. We're going to kind of go back and really look at maybe not the earliest of days, but certainly when API and application security started to become a thing. And if we go all the way back to the early 2000s, maybe through 2010, there were kind of three primary technologies that were out there for protecting applications. One was web application firewalls. Kind of the standard de facto, and especially once compliance became kind of king, almost everybody had to look at a web application firewall. But from a development side and kind of pre-production side, you had things called static application security testing. And then towards the end of that initial kind of wave, you saw kind of the emergence of the dynamic application security testing. And each of those was, for a different purpose. I think the firewalls were very much, hey, we need to put something in place that's just going to protect us, regardless of what we do from a development perspective. And I say that tongue in cheek, but I know having worked for a software company for a large percentage of my career, it was hard to get developers to stay up to date with all the different vulnerabilities that we found. We had to have firewalls in place. But then you had the static analysis, and I think we defined it in one of the previous sessions, where it's really looking at the code itself versus a dynamic type of approach for security testing, which is, this is really how do you go fire a lot of different attack vectors against a running application and then try to determine what you're seeing there. And during this time frame, you were seeing kind of an explosion, I think, from people moving from just having applications in data centers that were being run kind of within a private network to suddenly they're exposing more and more applications, e-commerce sites, and other types of integration technologies to this crazy World Wide Web that was out there. And so you were seeing a huge rise in the number of attacks that were going on. You were certainly seeing compliance start to become mandated in the industry. And then, ultimately it came down to the high profile breaches and a number of different events that occurred that started to get the attention and really the budget mindset, as it were, for this particular segment. Most of what we're talking about here is kind of the early days of SQL injection, cross-site scripting, remote file inclusion, anything that you could do to kind of bang away on an application. And in most cases, you could do it kind of at your leisure from almost anywhere in the world, sitting at home in your underwear, because nobody really had the monitoring tools that were in place. But if we kind of look at from an adversary perspective, I'm curious, I don't care, Corey or Nick, and what was your thought in those days as the web application firewall started to come to the market? Was that a huge deterrent, or was that kind of a mild deterrent from your perspective? So,
Yeah, it's definitely a layer of protection, and it could be a hindrance to a typical test. However, it's just a layer, and so almost on a monthly basis, there are web application firewall bypasses that are coming out. And so once you find out, okay, how is it blocking? How can I avoid that and move forward with that? So it is a layer of protection, and it's an important one, just like the others will be, but once you're beyond that hurdle, then you can go on and continue to test as you would otherwise.
Yeah, excellent. Anything to add there, Nick?
No, I agree. It's definitely a layer of security. When I come across a web application firewall, I'll clearly see it because it's dropping, any of my requests that have like SQL injection payloads, cross-site scripting payloads, and then I'll run something like WHAT against it and try to identify the web application firewall so I can find ways to encode my payloads, to find ways to bypass it, as Corey was mentioning. If I can completely bypass the WAF entirely, I will, by just finding like the IP address of the application behind the scenes. And if the app isn't explicitly only talking to the web application firewall for inbound requests, then it's as if you don't even have a WAF in the first place. And then WAFs have a rule set that are constantly changing, not just like their bypasses, but they're run by people, by security engineering teams and infrastructure teams. They like to now codify a lot of their rule sets, and they're continuously changing them. And I've seen issues where a fat-fingered change or a bad change goes in, and now you've opened yourself up to a previous attack that was maybe completely closed off, or an entire geolocation now being accessible. And so some of the things that now I see a lot of pen testers doing is continuously testing a lot of these WAFs, because they are going to be a constantly evolving security control. But it's just one layer in that defense in depth approach.
All right. I think I'm back as well, maybe. So actually that was a great lead in, though, really almost for you, Jeff, which is what he's talking about is ways to bypass the WAF protections, but from a defender and from an implementer side of the equation. I mean, what were your thoughts around the early days of the WAF market itself?
It was definitely a challenge. I mean, a lot of companies didn't have a WAF. They just had a firewall doing layer 3, layer 4. The ones that are more sophisticated, of course, had a WAF. There was a lot of cat and mouse chasing. So as the attacks come in, we'd see, was there impact or not, how far they could actually perturb the environment. So it was updating signatures. It was doing some custom definitions. So it was really a lot of manual effort to try to keep these guys out.
And I think manual, for me, was always the key, because I'll go as fast as I can, but what I always found is, you had a really good security architect, and if you had one good one, you were lucky. They didn't like managing these firewall rules, but they would manage them for a while. But the number of rules that we would implement would slowly grow from 10 rules to 20 rules to 50 rules to 100 rules. And in the meantime, that guy's ready to check out and go to the next company. And then I'm left with a set of 100 different rules here that nobody really understands how they work. The applications are changing behind the scenes, and I'm starting to see false positives crop up. And at the end of the day, I'm kind of pissed off, to be honest, because I got to go back to the vendor and say, I got to write your professional services check to come in and help me clean up the 100 rules back down to something that's kind of manageable. So I think in the early days, it was the fact that they were just binary rules. It was looking for a single signature, kind of in a binary way. And if these guys went and tweaked the attack pattern at all, then I had to go tweak yet another rule to try to keep up with what they were doing. And the sophistication level was so low. What about, how were you guys able to tell as it relates to the various, whether it was dynamic test platforms or static test platforms? Was that something that you guys were able to kind of articulate? I loved how you talked about testing the applications to figure out if a firewall was in place, first and foremost, and then in some cases figure out what type it was. But were you able to leverage those actual test platforms in any significant ways?
Yeah, for like SAS and DAS, like these are tools that as a hacker we would use as well. This is like something that 110% for that continuous testing element, using something like Nuclei from like Project Discovery. I'm a big fan of using that to codify your attack unit tests, and to use that against an API is something that I absolutely love. Do you want to speak on the SAS side?
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, we're leveraging the same tools, so it's great all around for overall security, because we're using it on the defensive side, and then we're also implementing it on the offensive side, which is typically cat and mouse with all the security tools and techniques that are coming out. And so just something that helps enhance the automated portions of our testing, so that we can get into combining attacks and exploits to dive deeper into the vulnerabilities.
Any comments from you, Jeff, on trying to deploy those technologies with an internal development organization?
Yeah, I think a challenge was getting the dev teams to really adopt this methodology and really support. So a lot of times, I think that we were always behind the game. And then we had findings, how long it take to remediate. So it was constantly a lot of churn going on. So I think it's even a challenge sometimes today, depending on the organization.
Yeah, makes sense. So I guess, during this tenure, and again, it's kind of the nascent beginning of this, were there any go-tos from an attacker perspective? Were there things that you guys haven't described yet that you just would say, hey, in the early days, this is exactly where I would go to start the attack process, or things that you knew were going to be highly effective or give you key insight into a company's capabilities, as it were? Is there anything that you guys would talk about? Yeah.
Yeah. So something that I would always do as an attacker is you want to get as much information about your target, and that's your first step. And the first thing to do is actually use the application, generate some usable traffic that you can then analyze afterwards to say, oh, I see ID fields here in some of these URIs. Maybe I can do some BOLA type attacks here. Maybe as you're doing some more of your reconnaissance, you could find a Swagger file and some other useful tidbits that could be really helpful for future attacks. So for me, reconnaissance all the way before deploying, SQL map, or even opening up really my burp suite, is I'm just using the app, getting familiar with it, using my spidey senses to figure out, okay, because I was a developer in a past life, how would I code this function? How would I code that feature? And that becomes really helpful for how you would break into it.
Yep.
So just getting really familiar with the application, I think, is really key. It's something that I'd recommend every hacker who's looking to test an API do.
Yeah, I totally agree. In addition, open source intelligence. So before you even interact completely on the passive side, gathering usernames, emails, if there are GitHub repos that are publicly available, seeing what's in those, what issues have there been recently, and then, like Nick was saying, using the app, using the API, both so important. Learning from a tester's perspective, like what data can you even interact with from this application? Is it completely public API that's dealing with public information, not so sensitive, or are there requests that are going to interact with very sensitive data on the PCI side, for example, cardholder data or healthcare information? Are there requests there that you'd really want to focus on to see what vulnerabilities are?
Sounds good, guys. Well, I think just given the interest of time, we know that, the tools were necessary, right? And some tools, having a web application firewall is better than having no application firewall, is what I would say. And even in the early days, we would look at it and go, one of the first things you could do is start poking the applications, figure out which ones were protected, and then which ones weren't protected. And then simple things like, if you can gain admin credentials to the 2014 fun run, chances are you can use the same credentials on some of the more protected applications. And there's little tips and tricks like that I think are out there. But let's move, I guess, forward now, because those technologies had their place in time. Still useful. I would not suggest just abandoning them. But as we kind of look forward and move maybe 2010 and beyond, kind of up to the present, new technologies have come out. So the term interactive application system testing, kind of a combination of SAST and DAST testing tools to kind of more completely test the applications. Runtime application self-protection, or RASP-based technologies. The growth of DevSecOps and really starting to integrate more of these technologies into the DevSec or into the dev kind of build process. And as you said, one of the hardest things I think on the Defender side is just getting the developers to want to care about security first and foremost, and then if they do care, actually use the tools that we provide them with. And then finally, kind of the advancements. You're seeing kind of a new wave of API security technologies kind of come out. It's interesting to see if that will remain its own separate segment long term, or if that'll be kind of just part of an overall kind of cloud application. But certainly you're seeing a number of new techniques and technologies that are coming out in that particular arena. As we also look kind of at the market dynamics, the whole shift to agile development and really incorporating DevOps into this process to ensure that at least some level of security is kind of baked in pre-applications making it into the production lifecycle. But cloud adoption, the proliferation of APIs as a whole, I mean, the exposure area, just the whole threat landscape is literally 10x'd in a very, very short period of time. And then sophisticated attacks. And that's one that we'll just kind of talk about as we go, maybe as we talk through each of these things. When we talk about the new kind of technologies, I might skip the interactive, but from a RAS perspective, did you guys see a significant leap forward from a protection perspective, moving from more traditional WAF-based technologies into companies that were using a RASP type of technology? Did you notice a big difference? Or was it kind of a non-event from an adversarial perspective?
On the RASP side, I think it is relatively new. I've only had a couple of engagements where I've tested vendors that have been using this. There are certain edge cases that I have seen certain attacks be able to go through and penetrate, such as sending super massive requests that stress this particular control from working properly. So when you send massive payloads, sometimes these new technologies might not know how to correctly handle them. But I think that it's still early on, and this is an area where a lot of security researchers, as it's more adopted, such as like areas like GraphQL being a new API technology, more focus around its security is going to be scrutinized. And so we're going to see a lot more vulnerabilities and ways that bad actors may be able to break into them, because every hacker loves to be the first to like break into a new system, to have their name associated with a CVE. And so as a market opens with a new control, naturally it's going to be battle tested. And so we'll see where some of these areas are. How about yourself?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, users of API need to be able to request and interact with resources per the objectives of the business. And an attack is barely much more than that. It's just trying to do the same thing as that user. And so regardless of the latest tech, these requests are what's being used for identity that's really going to trust that user, and can that be compromised? Does the API itself actually have technical restrictions in place that are going to prevent user A from interacting with user B's resources? And that it's a huge challenge. But even beyond that, with many of the clients I see day to day, they're still back in the pre-2010 days, where we're using web application testing tools that are great for testing the web apps, but horrible for testing the APIs. And they're still using those tools against their APIs, getting clean reports back that are great for passing compliance, but they're leaving the vulnerabilities still out there up for the taking.
No, that's great. What about you, Jeff? Was there a major shift? I mean, to me, the biggest difference between a WAF technology is that it's looking at an HTTP request coming in. What happens after it passes that through, doesn't really care about until it gets the response back. So anything that was going on at the application, the RASP at least had, for me, a lot more potential, because it wasn't just looking at a single transaction pair coming in and out. It was deployed at the application server. It was actually watching the runtime events at the server level. It was able to see a lot more data than maybe the traditional WAF was. But I mean, they didn't get very much adoption. I mean, there were certain ones. Signal Sciences probably is the one that I would point to. Maybe Contrast Security, you could lump in that bucket, as well as a couple that have made good inroads, and certainly Contrast for specific segments. But from your perspective, was there a big seismic shift moving from the WAF protection level to a RASP type of methodology?
I mean, in theory, the concept's great, a second layer of protection that does more at layer 7, but unfortunately, adoption was slow. The vendors didn't really get much traction, so it's just a shame that didn't go further along.
Yeah.
So I'm not seeing much adoption on my side.
Yeah, what we found was the RASP technologies typically worked well for certain technology stacks, and especially when you had a tier 1 team who was competent in being able to deploy it and maintain it as part of the application maintenance. Where we always struggled was, but I had dozens of applications that have been around for 20 years. Nobody's touching those applications, and you're asking me to deploy an agent on an old set of technology, or you're asking me to go to one of the tier 2 teams that just doesn't have the sophistication level. So where we used RASP was very few and far between, because it was really dependent upon my skill sets as an organization to continue to deploy, maintain it as part of the protection scheme as a whole. So DevSecOps. So if we talk about DevOps, we talk about Agile, we talk about all these things that are now being incorporated. It's a big shift left mindset, and people are going to really start to incorporate the tool sets in. Did you guys see a more difficult attack surface from your perspectives as those new techniques and as more emphasis was started to be placed on really leveraging security into the development process as a whole?
One of the things that I really like about the new DevSecOps methodology with writing code and iterating and going really fast, especially in the API space, is that it almost invites continuous testing and incremental testing. And as a bug bounty researcher, I love getting like those early new beta features when I'm a part of a private program, because I'm a part of the process of writing a secure API or security application. And so this is one area that I am a huge fan of. I think it works really well with how developers think and how product wants to get like real actionable data from some of their ideas that they're sort of putting out there into the world. So they're getting some product market fit, they're getting some development and some product, and they're getting some incremental security along the way, whether that's through iterative bug bounty test, a pen test after every single ship, whether they've got like SemGrep, nuclei tests that are in your actual build pipeline that are catching some of that low-hanging fruit. I'm a big fan of continuously codifying your vulnerabilities that you've seen traditionally, because regressions happen all the time. People write the same errors, and so when you can catch your Achilles heel, whether that's a PDF generation API endpoint, and you've always had an issue there because this PDF generation vulnerability has caused you to leak secrets, then you're going to want to narrow in on that, especially as you write more and more. And so, yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, totally agree. When DevSecOps is deployed successfully in the right ways across the application or organization space, then it's going to raise the bar for the findings from an adversary perspective. But the problem is that you have sprawl, you have APIs all over the place that companies are unaware of. So are those going to be a part of the DevSecOps process? Probably not, because they're not even known about. And so from a tester's perspective, can you find those? Can you add that new perspective for an organization to be able to understand their attack surface and what's available to attackers so that they can lock it down?
Yep, great. From a defender, Jeff, thoughts?
I mean, DevSecOps definitely has helped out a lot because developers are engaged sooner, and I'm currently working on an initiative before shift left. We're at the product phase. You have the people designing the strategy of product, think about security from the conception, before it's the developers. And even on the APIs, it's very important, you have your API baseline for your inventory, but even now to scan for shadow APIs. That's a whole nother capability that vendors are releasing, because you'll be surprised how many APIs you may not know about.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I think, we're still using, DevSecOps is kind of a process versus a tool. So in many cases, they're still using static application testing. They're still using dynamic application testing. It's just that it's not. We had a prior session where we talked about there's companies that probably run that once a year for compliance, or once a quarter for compliance. They're not really kind of timing it with the rate and change of the applications. But I think with the DevSecOps movement, you're seeing it is incorporated. At least it's incorporated as part of the build process when you're doing it right. Corey, you said it the best way. If you're doing it right, then it adds a lot of value, and that's always the challenge with a lot of these different companies. So I do want to go back, because I think all three of you have mentioned it before, but API sprawl as a whole. And just, from the attacker perspective, what's that done for business, so to speak? Is it just talk about what, quantify it, if you will, or put it in terms of, how hard is your job now that we're seeing the kind of sprawl that we're seeing versus maybe, prior to the recent proliferation that we've seen. So, thoughts?
Everything's an API nowadays, or has an API, especially as we look at now like this huge adoption of AI and foundational models and LLMs, they also want to use APIs to like facilitate consumers who want to do something with their agents. So APIs are only going to get bigger and more widespread, especially in their usage. And from an attacker's perspective, I like that.
Yeah.
As someone who specializes in the API hacking space, this means that this is a growing concern, and this is going to mean job security, bounties,
Yep.
pen test gigs.
Yeah. So AI is powered by APIs. And so this is just a new API attack vector that we can interact with. Oftentimes, these are opportunities for businesses that are being jumped on well before security is implemented and taken seriously. And so the opportunity is there, the business is using it, adopting what they don't know is a new attack surface without protection. And it's just a new vector for us to get in and not only apply our classic attacks that we've been using for APIs, but also a new set of attacks with the LLM top 10, where we can perform injection through the AI, we can perform knowledge-based poisoning, and especially information disclosure.
Yep.
AIs love to disclose all sorts of information, whether it's true or not. And so now there's also this new risk of being a legal representative of the organization. So when an LLM or chatbot hallucinates and says you can have a flight for $1, and then the Canadian government says, yes, you have to honor that,
Yeah.
Those are new important risks that you have to consider.
Man, you guys just bypassed API, went straight on into AI. That's awesome. I love it, man. So, Jeff, let's stay with APIs first, then we can get to AI maybe. But I mean, biggest challenge you run into on the API front?
Well, I would say I was concerned about APIs probably over 3 years ago,
Yep.
which is an early adopter. I'm surprised there's not more attacks. There have been some notable attacks the last 6-9 months a year. T-Mobile's notorious. And it's not really an attack, it's leaving the API wide open. It's like having your front door open and the threat actors walks in. And recent one was Dell. They didn't throttle the requests. The big API exposure. So, my strategy was understanding what are all my APIs that we know about, looking at are they authenticated, unauthenticated, look at APIs going across them, but also now really look at deep at shadow APIs. But as part of my vendor management third-party risk, I'm starting to push the onus on my vendors. What is your API inventory? I'm going to start scanning them because I guarantee most of them don't have an API strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, we talk to customers all the time, and it's still surprising because we've been dealing with APIs for a long time. The number one starting point is discovery. They're still out there saying, I don't know how many APIs I have, I don't know how many endpoints I have, and I don't really understand how they're being used. And so it's amazing to me that is still kind of the starting point before you even get into and which ones are vulnerable or which ones have other issues that are out there. It's just simply the fact that the sprawl that's going on that we see is certainly significant that it's out there. So good. Any I mentioned as part of this section kind of the advanced persistent threat concept, and that's always that could be a barroom talk for hours sometimes. But is there anything you guys are seeing from an APT perspective in the market or anything out there that's unusual or anything that we should be concerned with as we kind of continue to look at the app and API landscape?
You now have to worry about your vendors pushing out an update to their product.
Yeah.
Well,
And AI. So yeah.
That's actually called a VPT.
Yeah. A vendor persistent
threat.
Yeah. Anything from your perspective, Jeff? Anything else that's out there?
I don't know from the APT actors if they're really targeting APIs that much. You may know more, but I'm not seeing that as much. But on the vendor front, yes, I think vendors, we have to take a much tighter grasp on what they're doing in our environment.
Yep.
And the effect they could have, and also what's the overall systematic risk they could cause.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we could talk again for hours on the current tool stacks, but if we kind of look ahead now and we say, all right, sure, there's 1,000 different vendors here bringing the latest and greatest, but let's start with the attackers because I always start with you guys. What is kind of the biggest area of opportunity? AI may be that area of opportunity, but what is the biggest area of opportunity that you feel like is a market gap that's out there in today's environment?
one for me that just consistently always pops up is just poor authentication and authorization within APIs. I think that whether your API is for internal-facing tools only or external ones, it shouldn't really matter. Like, you should still have really good, strict authorization and authentication practices that are built into your API strategy, potentially within your business logic layer in the GraphQL space. I like to separate your authorization and authentication away from your GraphQL layer, because there's a lot of like juicy vulnerabilities that you can get in a design pattern like that. But yeah, I'd say auth-n, auth-z are still like top risks that are still open.
Yeah, for me, what I'm seeing on the average pen test is a gap in enterprise vulnerability management programs. And I touched on this earlier, where the wrong tools are being used for API security, which I think is great to see all the vendors out here trying to solve that problem.
Yep.
The wrong tools are being used. Those tools were successful in decades past on testing for web app vulnerabilities, but they missed the API vulnerabilities. Those result in false negatives, which is probably one of the worst things an organization can get, because now there's a false sense of security. They don't get the budget in order to make sure that the security is there. And then they go about their business until there's a leak or a breach.
Makes sense. And from your perspective, biggest gaps?
Yeah, I think it's really the API testing as well as pen testing APIs. I mean, we have API security tools, but to do true pen testing APIs, that's what I'm doing a lot of focus today on.
Yeah. Okay, great. We talked, I want to go back to AI just one more time, because I just want to, it's creating a lot of opportunity for you guys today. Do you see it continuing to do that? Do you see it getting potentially starting to make your jobs more difficult? You talked earlier on about how you go and poke applications and test them to kind of figure out what type of tools they're really using. I mean, AI is a good way to kind of model certain behaviors and try to pick up on those kind of things. But I mean, are you concerned about the AI going from your best friend right now to becoming a foe for you guys moving forward?
So I think AI is just like a tool, no different than a shovel or a hammer. It's really like who wields it and what they're going to do with it that really matters. So as a pen tester, I want to see more secure applications. When I can't get in, it's a good thing. Maybe not for me, but like for the world, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And so whether or not you're using an AI, that's in the back end, in the operations center, looking at every single call and it's sort of flagging the ones that it thinks are a little more malicious, that's great for me, for the average consumer. And on the red teaming side, if I can build a API or an AI agent that can just look at a Swagger file, look at maybe a bunch of proxied requests between me and an API and say, hey, Nick, I just gave you a list of 100 different things that I think might work in regards to like an authorization issue or an authentication issue here that you can add to your checklist as a pen tester.
Yep.
Oh, and by the way, I coded those into nuclei tests for you. And so now you can start to build a library of security tests that give that, true sense of security, because now you have tailored security tests that have been sort of co-piloted between myself, an expert, and an AI that are looking for loopholes, vulnerabilities, logic errors, and you're now writing, actual code that will continuously test that application, put it into the pipeline. So I think there's a lot of different opportunities, both on the defender and on the attacker side, that AI can be leveraged, especially in the API use case.
Yeah, great answer.
Yep, AI is going to be leveraged on both sides. It's going to enhance criminal programs and what they can do, and the social engineering side, of course. On the pen test side, it is great for taking large amounts of data, simplifying it for things for testers to focus on. But then there are also a series of like unforeseen consequences that are just the unknown of a new business opportunity. So you do have the legal representative side with Canada Air that I mentioned earlier. GMC sold a truck for $1 over a chatbot. I don't know that actually went through. And then what else is it going to be used for? It's going to be used by developers that are brand new at developing.
Yeah.
And what do all technologies, new technologies lack? Security. And so when those developers go to develop with AI, it develops insecure code. And with all those organizations that don't have good DevSecOps programs, we're going to see old vulnerabilities coming back that we haven't seen for a while.
Awesome. That's so awesome. Those are two good answers, Jeff. You got anything you can top that
I would
with?
say it's very concerning. You look at today, breaches that are all-time high.
Yeah.
And this isn't technologies that we've known about for years. There's frameworks, best practices that are not being adhered to. So when AI ramps up at threat actors, it's going to lower the barrier of entry. It's going to increase the velocity of attack. And I think we're going to be in a much worse situation in the future. So I hope our security vendors help with this and adopt AI so we can keep up with the attack velocity.
No, it makes sense. That makes sense. All right, last one, or last major topic, and then we'll maybe open it up. But zero trust. And we've got a couple of our customers who basically, doesn't matter, internal, external, everything's encrypted. But yet they want us to do inspection against them. But from a zero trust perspective, is it a big deal for you guys as you're trying to do the pen testing? Is it a major obstacle? Is it not a major obstacle? Talk to us about that, because it's a big topic right now. We're secure. We're zero trust everywhere.
Let's just say, like, as an attacker, I have yet to see like a zero trust environment implemented in a way that has prevented me from being able to penetrate and get to the digital crown jewels that I need to show that I've been able to get to.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of doubts with the current zero trust market and whether or not that's even attainable by some companies, especially the ones that are looking to ship fast, get that high velocity, want to really trust and empower their employees. That balancing act between friction and, convenience.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyways, I have my doubts if zero trust is even something that can be attained and deployed, in an environment where you really want to push and develop a bunch of APIs, build out a bunch of new endpoints. So, if someone could do it, I'd love to try hacking it.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, it feels like it's more of a dream or a goal. Because, even if you just break down an API request, at some point, they want their users to be able to interact with resources. So at some point, they have to trust the token that's in place. They have to trust the authentication process that's in place in order for that user to interact with their resources.
Yep.
And so that it just lofty, great. I would love to see it in place as well. I think if you take a server and you unplug it, throw it into the ocean, you could have zero trust.
You could have zero trust. That's a good way. That's good.
But yeah, it's definitely a goal. It's a great goal. Work towards it. Limit trust as much as possible, especially with APIs. If you take the top 10, so many of them are about unrestricted access or unauthorized access, or too much trust for third-party APIs. You should not trust your third-party APIs. That's a great goal for your organization to have. You should treat those like you treat user input and make sure that it's validated, sanitized before it interacts with your systems.
Awesome. Anything to add, Jeff?
Yeah, I would say zero trust is the nirvana we want to get to in every security swim lane. I think the challenge with APIs is we need to authenticate more thoroughly, more frequently today, and there is no IDP for APIs.
Awesome.
So areas like APIs, non-human identities, I'm really pushing from the mindset of my vendors. Let's see if we can create a true authentication platform where we can dictate how frequently authenticate, just to really secure those access down to the smallest surface plane as possible.
Yeah, great. Well, this was an awesome session. You guys did fantastic, from my opinion. Are there any closing remarks, any closing words? Anything anybody wants to add to this conversation?
So, myself, my team has many years experience in web app filtering. And I just say, the adoption of ThreatX has been a game changer because it's low friction.
Thanks, man. I'll pay you later.
It's an easy button for my team, and we don't have to sit there and manage it all the time. So it's been a very positive experience. So thank you, Gene and team.
Yeah, great. All right, guys. I think it was fantastic. I think they had great answers. Appreciate your time. You got anything last bits?
One more thing. I touched on using the right tools to test your APIs. So I would encourage everyone to in a safe, secure environment, download deliberately insecure APIs like the completely ridiculous API project by OWASP, and use your current tools against those to make sure that you're getting quality results.
Great tip. Great tip. All right. No.
I would say like folks should start to build out their API security unit test libraries and start to embed those in their delivery. If you have, even just one security test that you can prove, oh, that passed, you can at least show with some confidence that you shouldn't be attacked in that particular vector. Look at things like the OWASP ASVS for, a reference guide for the types of things that you'd want to build in your security unit tests. And use open source tools like Nuclei, SemGrep that you can do to accomplish this. This is going to be a huge game changer for your application security programs.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys. You did a great job today, and I hope everybody enjoyed the session, and we'll look forward to the next one. Thank you.